Hello everyone, I'm Alex Dykes, and today by viewer request we're out here in the forest taking a look at the 2015 Subaru Forester. Now this is Subaru's compact crossover vehicle, and it does business with the likes of the Honda CR-V, the Toyota RAV4, the Escape, and the Equinox. Those are the four top sellers in this segment, and so that's really what I'll be limiting my comparisons to, with the exception of the Jeep Cherokee, because in many ways the Forester and the Cherokee are very similarly minded vehicles. Now the version we're looking at here is the 2-liter turbocharged version of the Forester, and as such that really limits the competitive set, because Toyota, Honda, as well as Nissan and a number of other manufacturers have been removing their V6 engine options from their compact crossovers. And that means you have to cross them off the shopping list when you're comparing this 2-liter turbo to something else. With this generation, Subaru has really redesigned the Forester to be much more of a crossover in the same theme that the rest of the entries in this segment are. And we have a much more crossover looking front end than we had before. Previous generations of the Forester looked very much like station wagons on stilts, and you can think of something like a Volvo XC60 or the older versions of the Subaru Outback. Same sort of thing was going on with the Forester. Our particular model has the optional HID headlamps. These are HID low beams only. The high beams are still halogen. And right down here we have the optional fog lamps as well. Much like the Jeep Cherokee, but very unlike the CR-V, the RAV4, the Escape, and all the other entries in this segment, the Forester has retained a certain dedication to off-roading ability. That's why we have a brush guard right here under the front bumper, and we also have published approach, departure, and breakover angles in the Forester, and you won't find those really in any of the other competitors. At 180 inches long, the Forester slots right in the middle of the pack in terms of overall length. Something like a RAV4, a CR-V, they're going to be a little bit shorter, but the Equinox and the Cherokee are a decent amount bigger in terms of length. At 8.7 inches of ground clearance, we have about 2 more inches of ground clearance than your average crossover in this segment. This is about 1 inch below the Cherokee, but depending on the trim of the Cherokee you get, the Forester actually has more advantageous approach and departure angles than the Cherokee. Even though the Forester is looking more like a crossover and less like a very tall wagon, we still have this very tall greenhouse that continues along the side and all the way around here to this relatively vertical back end. That makes cargo loading an awful lot more practical in the back here than some of those other more swoopy entries. Our XT model has these dual chrome exhaust tips that are quite attractive. We also have a power tailgate hatch on our model. When it comes to towing, the Forester can tow 1,500 pounds when properly equipped. That is at the low end of the scale. A lot of these compact crossover vehicles will tow about 2,500 pounds. If you get the Chevy Equinox, it'll tow 3,500 pounds. And the Cherokee is tops in this segment with a 4,500 pound towing capacity if you get the V6 engine. Under the hood, we find two different engine options. Things start out with a 2.5-liter Boxer 4-cylinder engine. Now, a Boxer engine is different than you'll find in every other entry in this segment, because most entries use an inline engine, so all the cylinders are arranged in a neat little row. A Boxer engine uses two separate banks of cylinders, kind of like a V engine, except that they're at 180 from each other, so they actually interact like this. That's why they call it a Boxer-style engine. That engine produces 170 horsepower and 174 pound-feet of torque. Now, one thing to know about the Subaru all-wheel drive system is that very much like most versions of Audi Quattro, it requires that the engine actually sits in front of the front axle. So you can see right here by these shock towers that the front axle is right here, and this engine actually is positioned right about here in the vehicle. So we have the engine, the torque converter, the transmission, then we have the front axle behind it. Now the reason Subaru uses a Boxer style engine is because it sits very low in the vehicle. So there's a lot of plastic trim going on up here, there are intake manifolds, the air conditioning compressor, etc. But the engine itself is actually quite far down there in the engine compartment. That helps lower the center of gravity of the vehicle, which is good for off-roading. Our particular vehicle has the optional 2-liter turbocharged 4-cylinder engine, produces 250 horsepower and 258 pound-feet of torque. This is somewhat closely related to the engine that's used in the Scion FRS as well as the Subaru BRZ. This right here is the intercooler. There's actually some ducting right here in the hood itself to direct air right down into that intercooler. The 2.5-liter engine is mated to a 6-speed manual transmission by default, and you can optionally get a CVT for $500 extra. That CVT is standard on limited touring models as well, and all versions of the 2-liter turbocharged engine. Like every other Subaru sold in America other than that BRZ, all-wheel drive is standard on the Forester. There are two different all-wheel drive systems used depending on the transmission. If you get the 6-speed manual transmission, then we get a viscous center coupling that sends about 50% of the power to the front, about 50% of the power to the rear, depending on the situation. Now that viscous clutch pack cannot completely lock up, so it can't send all the power to either axle. It really just depends on the situation. The CVT uses a different center coupling. It uses a multi-plate clutch setup that normally directs 60% of the power right here to the front, 40% to the rear, but it can completely lock up whenever the vehicle wants it to. So it's not just slip-based. If you floor the car will completely lock up that clutch pack for better acceleration. When it comes to fuel economy, the CVT is the way to go. The manual transmission comes in at 22 miles per gallon city, 29 highway, 23 combined. If you get the CVT, that jumps up to 24 city, 32 highway, 26 combined, which is an incredibly high number. That's actually higher than many of the front-wheel drive only competitors in this segment. It's definitely a few miles per gallon better than almost all the all-wheel drive entries in this segment as well. If you opt for this 2-liter turbocharged engine, then the fuel economy numbers do drop just a little bit to 23 city, 28 highway, 24 combined. And again, you can only get that 2-liter turbo with the CVT. Front seat comfort comes in at 7 out of 10 points. I don't find these seats quite as comfortable as those in the Cherokee or the Nissan Rogue, but I do find them more comfortable than the ones in the RAV4. Our particular model has this multi-way power driver's seat with a 2-position power lumbar support. The passenger seat remains manual in all models of the Forester. Right over here we do have a tilt telescopic steering column with a decent range of motion. I also give the back seats 7 out of 10 points. These seat bottom cushions are a little bit close to the floor for adults, but they would be good for children. This seat back does recline. There's a little nylon pull strap right here, and you can select from this is the most upright position to this position, which is the most reclined position. It does give you a little bit of added comfort right back here in the back. We have an extraordinarily large amount of headroom in the Forester and an extraordinarily large amount of legroom. Right here, this front seat is adjusted for me at 6 feet tall. I have about 4.5 inches of legroom left right there. And I also have about 2 inches of headroom left. If I move over to the middle seat is actually fairly comfortable for this segment. I do have about 1 inch of headroom left right here in the middle, and the hump isn't as bad as you'd think it might be in a dedicated all-wheel drive vehicle like this. If I move all the way over to the right side of the vehicle, this front seat is all the way back in its tracks, and I still have about 4 inches of legroom left. Rear passengers get a padded center armrest with dual cup holders, and the seat belt for the middle passenger does come down out of the ceiling. When taking a look at the headroom numbers, it is important to keep in mind that our Forester has this extraordinarily large sunroof that does impact rear headroom. The Forester has one of the largest headroom figures in this segment, so if you are looking for a vehicle with more legroom and more headroom, this is probably going to be it, even if you get the sunroof. So if you're a taller person and you're tired of vehicles where you can't get the sunroof, you might want to check out the Forester because this might be possible. Let's take a quick look around the interior with height adjustable seatbelts for both the driver and the front passenger, and we have a 2-way adjustable headrest for both the driver and the front passenger. Our particular model is the XT model, which means we have these standard leather seats right here. They are perforated, but they're not cooled. They are heated, however. Like most entries in this segment, the doors are a combination of hard and soft touch plastics. We have hard plastics right up here, soft plastics right there, and for the armrest, and then hard plastics again lower on the dashboard. This is faux metallic trim, although it is a very believable metallic trim. It does appear to scrape relatively easily compared to real aluminum. Over on the dashboard, we have a soft touch upper dashboard, again metallic effect trim, and then we have a moderately sized glove box right here. There are a few larger entries in this segment, but we can still fit this absolutely enormous Subaru instruction manual in right there, as well as a tablet computer without a problem. Over here in the center of the dashboard, we have a multi-information display as well as our climate control readout right there. This multi-information display on that side is controlled by the button on the steering wheel. You can get all-wheel drive status, fuel economy, different fuel economy display, your distance to empty, average miles per gallon. This average miles per gallon is quite low because we have been doing a lot of idling today. That's not normal driving. Temperature, again with the fuel economy there. And then we get some additional gauges because we're in the turbocharged model. We get accelerator position, we get turbo boost, and then we also get oil temperature. Below that display, we have 2 large air vents right here, and our particular model has the optional navigation and infotainment system. If you want to know more about this particular unit, then go ahead and click that banner at the bottom of your screen to be taken on over to our infotainment review. Below the infotainment screen, we have our dual zone climate control knobs. Below that, we have a 12-volt power port right there, a large cubby right over here. Below that cubby, we have our heated seat controls, high and low in our particular model, and this is an X mode button. This controls the CVT, the all-wheel drive system, and it also enables hill descent control, so you'd use this for mild off-roading situations. Behind that in the center console, we have a very traditional shift knob. We have 2 very large cup holders that we're easily able to accommodate large takeout drinks. This is a removable divider if you do want to put something even larger right there in that center console. And then if we move right on back to the center console and armrest, we do have a very deep compartment here. I have a whole variety of stuff right in there. That is where you'll find the USB input for the infotainment system. This is a nice, softly padded armrest, and it does slide forward and backward as well. Over on the driver's side, we have a simple 2-dial layout, tachometer over here, speedometer right over here on the right. We have a small information display right here in the center that's mostly limited to your odometer, your drive position for the transmission, your fuel gauge, and then the transmission indicator. Right there we're in intelligent mode. We can change to sport mode as well as sport sharp mode. Moving out to the steering wheel, we have a 3-spoke design. Right over here you find the controls for the adaptive cruise control control system. This is not a radar-based system, but we'll talk about that in just a second. We have our transmission mode indicators, Sport, Sport Sharp, and regular Sport mode over there. Shift paddles on the back of the steering column right there, plus and minus over here on this other side. Radio controls over here, volume up, down, track forward, backward, mode button, voice command button, dedicated phone hang up and pick up button, and this control button set right over here. If I move it over onto this side, maybe it's easier to see. These buttons right here control that multi-information display right over there in the center console. If we move on up to the ceiling, you'll notice that in addition to our map lights and our controls for the sunroof, we also have some additional buttons, and we have this large dual camera module right over here. This is the Subaru Eyesight System. Eyesight is Subaru's adaptive cruise control and safety system. It uses these two stereo cameras to sort of look at the road like a human does, giving the system depth perception. This way it doesn't need a radar sensor in the front bumper like most of these other systems out on the market do. Using the images provided, the system determines how far away from you the car in front of you is, and therefore it can brake the car, etc., like radar cruise control systems do. But it also gives you pre-collision warning, so if it thinks you're going to hit that car in front of you, it'll warn you about it, and then it will try and avoid the collision by applying the brakes for you. In addition to those features, it also features lane departure warning and lane departure monitoring systems, so it can actually read the lane lines on the road and determine if your vehicle is going to cross them unintended. The Forester has traditionally fared very well when it comes to cargo holding, and this generation of Forester is no different. The Forester has a relatively square profile and a very large cargo opening. It really makes loading cargo easier in the back here. Now, this is not the biggest vehicle in this segment, so you can't carry as many bags as some entries, but overall it scores very well. Right here I have a 26-inch roller bag and a 24-inch roller bag. You can see they fit in here very nicely. We also have an additional cargo load area under this cargo load floor. We have a styrofoam divider system right here to help you hold some of that cargo in. And if you remove this cargo divider system, you can actually fit a full-size spare tire in the Forester. A donut spare tire is standard. Overall, the Forester scores 9 out of 10 points in my exclusive Trunk Comfort Index. We're out here on these gravel roads because this is the perfect place to test out the Forester. The all-wheel drive system in this vehicle is really designed for this kind of situation, this kind of road, as well as ice and snow. Because this is a permanent all-wheel drive system, as I said earlier, so there's never a moment where the rear wheels aren't getting some amount of power from the engine. So in many of the competitive systems, you will feel a definite slip and then a definite grip, and that's why they're often referred to as slip and grip style systems. You don't get that feeling in the Forester, and as such, it feels very sure-footed on gravel, on dirt, on mud, or on ice or snow. This is also a good place to talk about suspension because the Forester has more ground clearance and more suspension travel than the average entry in this segment, except for that Jeep Cherokee. And that's really because, again, it was designed for this style of soft-roading or off-roading, whatever it is that you want to call this. If we speed up, you'll really see what I mean, because this suspension really absorbs the dips and the dives and the tree roots and everything else that are out here on this rough road that we're driving on an awful lot better than you'd find in the more street-oriented entries like the Ford Escape, the CR-V, or the RAV4. Now, the downside, of course, to this excellent ground clearance and all the suspension travel is that out on the road it does tend to feel a little bit floaty and a little bit less sure-footed in the corners than the rest of the competition, especially the very on-road dedicated competition like a Mazda CX-5. If we turn off traction control and we engage the X mode in this car and we just floor it up this hill, it's really easy to see that everything just grips very nicely, an awful lot better than you'd find in most of those systems out there. This Forester has a relatively unique combination of drivetrain components because we have a turbocharger and we have a continuously variable transmission, or a CVT, under the hood. Both of those things I like, and they combine to really make this Forester excellent at hill climbing. A turbocharger really gives you an awful lot more low-end torque, and the CVT allows the engine to operate in a more efficient or more powerful power band depending on what's exactly required at the time. It really means that climbing up steep inclines in this Forester is absolutely simple, and it doesn't really feel like the vehicle is stressing itself out at all. Now, if you do get the 2.5-liter base model, I do find that engine just a little bit coarser than some of the competition, but a lot of that really doesn't have anything to do with the engine. It has to do with the sound deadening in this vehicle. There isn't quite as much sound deadening going on in the Forester as you'll find in something like a Nissan Rogue or a Jeep Cherokee. The big thing to know about this vehicle when you compare it to those other entries is that the base price is a decent amount lower in the Forester, and it has standard all-wheel drive, so you do have to give up some of those niceties in exchange for the low price as well as the standard all-wheel drive system. When it comes to acceleration, I give the base model 7 out of 10 points, and I give this XT model 9 out of 10 points. I ran from 0 to 60 in 6.46 seconds, which definitely puts this on the quicker end of the pack, even considering the fact that the Jeep Cherokee has a more powerful V6 and the fact that the Equinox has a 300 horsepower V6. They're heavier than this vehicle and they don't have the CVT, and the CVT really helps the acceleration in this vehicle, especially when combined with the turbocharged engine. When it comes to ride, I give the Forester 7 out of 10 points. It really depends on what you're after, of course, in a vehicle. The Forester is higher up off the ground, and we have higher aspect ratio tires in this vehicle. That means that out here on the freeway like we're on right now, it does feel a little bit more ponderous than something like a Nissan Rogue or a Toyota RAV4 or a Honda CR-V that are very dedicated on-road vehicles. This feels very much like the Jeep Cherokee, which also has a similar off-road focus to it, and as a result has that same sort of ponderous feeling out on the highway. When it comes to handling, I give the Forester 7 out of 10 points. This really doesn't handle as well as the more dedicated on-road vehicles like the Mazda CX-5, the Honda CR-V, or the Toyota RAV4. But none of those vehicles would be terribly good off-road, and that's really where the Forester does shine. In terms of braking, I give this vehicle 8 out of 10 points. Braking fade resistance was very good, and braking distances were about average for this segment. In terms of cabin noise, this vehicle came in at 74 decibels, which does make this one of the louder entries in this segment. If you want a quiet entry in this segment, you're going to have to pay a decent amount more, however, so do keep in mind that the base price on the Forester is relatively low. Let's talk about the transmission for a second. In general, I like CVTs, and that also applies to the Subaru Forester. I know a lot of people have been giving Subaru a hard time for their transition to CVTs, but I really think that is the way to go for this brand. It really helps the Forester get absolutely excellent fuel economy. I've been averaging 25 miles per gallon in this Forester, which is just about what the EPA says you'll do in the all-wheel drive turbo model. Now that fuel economy is all down to this CVT because we have been spending a decent amount of time hill climbing, driving on winding mountain roads, testing this vehicle, as well as idling during video and photo shoots, so 25 miles per gallon is very good for this kind of vehicle. 25 miles per gallon is actually better in my daily commute than many of the 4-cylinder base competitors out there, and those really would be compared to the higher mile per gallon non-turbo Forester, which does even better than this. Now if you get the XT model with the turbocharged engine, we have some additional buttons right here on the steering wheel. We have Sport and Sport Sharp. That's because this transmission has 3 separate modes in this vehicle: Sport, Intelligent, and Sport Sharp. In Intelligent mode, it operates like your standard old CVT. If we put it in the Sport mode, it attempts to hold the revs a little bit higher, and if you use the paddle shifters, it'll imitate a 6-speed automatic transmission. If you put it in Sport Sharp, it'll attempt to imitate an 8-speed automatic transmission. Now if you do plan on using these manual shift paddles on the steering wheel, you should know that shifts in this vehicle are not going to be as quick or as crisp as a traditional automatic transmission. Let's talk about the Eyesight System that I showed you earlier. It's right up there by the sunroof controls. This is an interesting variation on adaptive cruise control because up until now, pretty much every adaptive cruise control system out there used a radar sensor, very much like the cops use to try and track your speed out on the road. The radar sensor is mounted on the front bumper, and it sends out a signal to see how close the car in front of you is to you and how fast it's going in relation to your speed. The problem with that, of course, is that if you want lane departure warning and lane monitoring systems in addition to your radar cruise control system, you have to have a camera system right up here in the center console anyway. The other problem is, of course, that if you get into a minor fender bender accident, it tends to be very expensive because that radar sensor is right up front. It can't be really behind that much in the car, and so it's going to be right up there in the first line of defense. It's going to get injured first and have to be replaced, and they're fairly expensive. This Eyesight System is back here out of harm's way, and so if you do get into a minor fender bender, the Eyesight System really isn't involved, and so it should be relatively less expensive to repair in the event of a minor front end accident. Supposedly this system also costs less than those radar sensors, although this particular vehicle bundles this package in a $2,400 package, so it's a little bit difficult to separate it from the other options that are also included with it, like HID headlamps, etc. Overall, the Eyesight System works very well. It does offer full speed range cruise control up to about 90 miles an hour or so, and it will take you to a complete stop. Like many of those other radar cruise control systems out there, however, this one will not hold you at that stop. If it does stop you, it will actually release the brake pedal after a short while and tell you that you need to put your foot on the brake to keep you stopped. An important thing to know about the Eyesight System is that because it is camera-based, it's not radar-based, it is more susceptible to weather interference. So if it's snowing or if it's raining outside, a radar cruise control system will in general still give you pre-collision warning and it will still function up to a limited extent, but this system in general won't function quite as well. Also, if your windscreen is really dirty or obscured or is foggy, etc., this system will have a problem operating because it does need to look out the same windscreen that you're looking out to drive the car. The Forester is overall a solid vehicle in this segment, especially if you're looking for something that has some off-road cred, very much like that Jeep Cherokee. The other big selling entries in this segment really don't have the same off-road ability that the Subaru does, and as such it's difficult to draw direct on-road comparisons because you do have to give up some on-road prowess in order to get the off-road ability, and you don't really have that off-road ability in the RAV4, the CR-V, etc. Sure, the RAV4 does have a ability to lock that center clutch pack, but it really doesn't have the same kind of off-road snow and ice traction that you get in the Subaru system. This system is not a slip and grip system, so it is always active, and that's very different than most of the competition. For 2015, Subaru has added $200 to the base price of the Forester. That means this now starts at $22,195. The important thing to know about the Forester is that all-wheel drive is standard, of course, like it is for almost every Subaru model in America. And that really separates this from the rest of the competition, because all those other competitors out there start at front-wheel drive for their base price. Although all-wheel drive is standard in the Forester, an automatic transmission is not. It will set you back an extra $500 to get the CVT. Even so, the Forester ends up $2,000 to $5,000 less than the competition, and that's before you include the fact that this has, again, standard all-wheel drive, because all-wheel drive does add about $2,000 on the vast majority of those competitors. Subaru's strong value proposition continues all the way up the scale, and when you compare this with similarly configured RAV4s, CR-Vs, Escapes, etc., the Forester is going to be less expensive than all those other options. If you're just after the least expensive all-wheel drive vehicle in this segment, it is by far going to be this Forester. The turbocharged XT model that we're looking at right here starts at $28,495 for the 2015 model year. That's about a $3,500 bump over a similarly configured 2.5-liter Forester. If you option your XT all the way up, it'll end up at $36,000 approximately. And even though that sounds like a lot of money, it is just about the same price as a similarly configured Ford Escape or a Jeep Cherokee. Versus the Escape and the Cherokee, you will find a wider variety of gadgets and gizmos available in the Cherokee and the Escape that you can't buy at any price on the Forester, but they will cost you an awful lot more money. So even though $36,000 may sound like an awful lot for a fully loaded Forester, it ends up just about the same as the rest of those V6 competitors. Overall, the Forester provides an excellent balance of fuel economy and soft road and mild off-road ability. If you're seriously going to take your compact crossover off-road, then only the Jeep Cherokee Trailhawk will really fit that need, because it does have a 2-speed transfer case, has that low range mode, and it also has locking differentials that you won't find on the Forester or any other entry in this compact crossover segment. If you're looking for the vehicle with the best snow and ice traction, then look no further than the Forester. It's all down to the all-wheel drive system. Subaru's all-wheel drive system is always on. It's always sending about 40% of the power to the rear, about 60% up front if you get the CVT, 50-50 approximately if you get the manual transmission. And that's very different than the rest of the competition, including the Jeep Cherokee. The Cherokee will actually disconnect its rear axle under most circumstances as long as you're in the auto mode. Now, if you do engage snow and ice mode and other modes in the Cherokee's Select-O-Matic system, whatever it is that they call it in the center console, then it will direct power to the rear axle at all times. But this vehicle is always engaged, so there's no knob to play with, no button to play with. It's always ready for your slippery condition. Now, even though the Subaru all-wheel drive system is always engaged, it still manages to beat the rest of the competition in terms of fuel economy. The average on this is 1 to 2 miles per gallon better than most of these other entries if they're equipped with all-wheel drive, and just about the same as most of the front-wheel drive options in this segment. And that really does pay dividends at the fuel pump. My bottom line with the Forester is that this is definitely a vehicle that I would recommend. It's also a vehicle that I would purchase if I was after optimum fuel economy and I didn't need the aggressive off-road capabilities of that Cherokee Trailhawk. There are, of course, a few downsides with the Forester. I do find the interior and some of the other competitors a little bit more compelling. I find the seats and some of the other competitors a little bit more comfortable as well. But the Forester is an excellent balance all the way across the board. Thanks for taking the time to check out this video. Again, I'm Alex Dykes, and this has been the 2015 Subaru Forester. Go ahead and click that subscribe banner at the bottom of your screen so you can be updated on all of my latest videos. You can find me over at facebook.com/AlexandAutos. You can email your questions to alex@alexandautos.com, and I'll see you next week.